Hello, welcome back. So, I am here to talk about a few more nonfiction books that I have read recently. I've read these over the past few weeks, and I'm just going to dive right into it. The first book I read was Hiroo Onada's No Surrender, My 30-Year War. I was really surprised when I found this book. I found this at a Goodwill in Stanford, Kentucky. I, I was not expecting to see this, and in such good condition. I sort of ripped it there a little bit, but it was just fine when I found it. So Hiroo Onoda is famous for one reason and one reason only, and it's that he continued to fight the Second World War 30 years after it ended. He went into the jungle of the Philippines, an island there in 1944. He was tasked with blowing up a dock. He said that he had been sent to a special school for commandos where he was taught that his job was to stay doing his job until he was relieved by someone he knew, an authority figure that he knew, and not to die. So, a lot of Japanese soldiers, they decided to go out either with a grenade or banzai charges or something of that nature. His orders were not to die, to keep fighting until relieved. And he actually went into the jungle with, I think, three other soldiers. He was the commander, and the first guy lasted until 1948. The second was killed in the 50s, and the third died, I think, in 1972, just a couple of years. I think did I say 1974? Yeah, he came out in 1974. So he is a controversial figure, clearly, because, well, Hiroo Onoda and his companions actually killed regular Philippine citizens there. They would just be out in their fields, and a couple of Japanese soldiers would walk out of the woods 20 years after the war had ended and shoot them or shoot at them. And this is such a strange story because every bit of evidence he gets over these 30 years that the war is over, he's like, no, that's not really my brother calling for me, or that's my brother out there calling for me on the megaphone, but he's been taken prisoner by the Americans and forced to do this at gunpoint. And these newspapers that we find in regular people's houses, well, these regular people are spies. They're American soldiers dressed up as regular people, and these letters they gave us from our family, they're all doctored. And well, look at this photo of our family saying, "Hey, please come back." But why is that guy in the picture? That guy's not my relative. He's just my cousin. Why would they put him in? Just really absurd. Like, whenever the people forming their commando unit found Hiroo Onoda, they just stumbled into like the perfect person who would just like follow orders to a T forever. There's another school of thought that says that he just really liked being in the jungle by himself, or with his companions, and maybe he just liked shooting at people and shooting people. I have read that this book was, so he came out of the jungle, he went to Japan, and from what I understand, he went to a hotel with a bunch of prominent, I'm not sure, I guess Japanese publishers, and they concocted this book. That's what I read. And so they made sure to make it look a certain way, that he was just a good soldier following orders. Somebody wrote, I didn't write this, but on the very last page, somebody wrote, very loyal, very loyal, patriotic, and very dumb. Now, a lot of people think that Hiroo Onoda was a hero because of his loyalty to the Japanese Empire. I really don't know where I stand on that. This is really the only book I've ever read about him. I've heard about him my whole life. And it is so difficult to believe that he could convince himself of all these things that Well, the war is still going on. It's 1970 now. Been in this jungle a long time eating bananas. That's mostly apparently what they ate was like green bananas for some reason. And all of those, the war seems to have ended 30 years ago, but I'm still fighting it. I don't know if I buy that. I don't think I buy that. I think he just liked being in the woods. I think he liked being in the woods, free of authority, stealing from the locals. I don't know. Like I said, he's a controversial figure. I don't know where to come down on this guy's story. He only died about 12 years ago, something like that. He went back to Japan. He didn't like how Japan was, and he moved to Brazil and lived on a farm in Brazil. I think it was Brazil. And what a strange what a strange story. I don't really know what else to say other than that. I mean, just a really weird, really strange story about a guy who kept fighting the war for 30 years. And this guy that's smiling in this photo is a college student from Japan. He said he was going to go to the Philippines and find Hiroo Onada. And he did. He was also supposed to find the Yeti in Tibet or Nepal. And I don't guess he found the Yeti. Uh, but he did find Hiroo Onoda. And Onoda said that he thought about just shooting the guy, and he thought he was a spy until he realized that no, this really is just a Japanese college kid who's just here camping. It was a weird. It was interesting, but it was very strange. So the book I read after that was Breach of Faith by the Fall of Richard, or Breach of Faith, The Fall of Richard Nixon. So this is by Theodore H. White, and he was a reporter for many, many years. He really, really did not like Richard Nixon. So he had been following Nixon's story for since the 50s. Theodore White was a Democrat, and so he was already predisposed not to like Richard Nixon, but he just did not like Richard Nixon as a human being. He didn't like the way he campaigned. He didn't like the way he treated other people. He did not like Nixon through and through. And he was very, very open about that fact that he did not like Nixon, didn't want Nixon to be president. And the Watergate scandal, and Nixon's attempted cover-up of the Watergate scandal made it even worse for him. He liked him even less, came to really despise Richard Nixon. Even though he openly admitted that he admired some of the things that Richard Nixon had done as far as foreign policy went. That he respected Richard Nixon in a lot of ways for some of the things that he had been able to accomplish as president, and that if Watergate hadn't happened, he wouldn't have liked Richard Nixon, but he could have respected him. Whereas when Nixon tried to cover up the Watergate break-in, he just lost whatever shred of respect he had for him. And so Theodore White was a reporter in Washington, D.C., and I guess he covered the politics. I guess he was at the White House quite often in the press pool and that sort of thing. It was really interesting because he had conversations with Richard Nixon over many years. I think he said he talked to him directly like 17 times or something like that. One time he sat with Richard Nixon for 2.5 hours or so, and they had a conversation. He thought that was really strange because that's not normal. Presidents are usually very busy and they don't want to talk to reporters, but he sat and talked to him for 2.5 hours. And this book also really made it clear to me the sort of the nail in the coffin as far as Nixon's presidency was, which is that a tape. So Nixon was recording everything he said after a certain point, and he had recorded a conversation he had with, was it H.R. Haldeman, where Haldeman had laid out what the break-in at the Watergate was about, that it was some of the people that were under him, and instead of Nixon saying, I can't have anything to do with that, they all have to be fired right now, we have to make this public, this is wrong, this is bad, Nixon could have saved himself if he had said all that. If he had said, "What are you doing, you idiot? You're fired. All those people are fired. We have to make this public right now." Nixon could have saved his presidency in that moment. What he did instead was say, "Well, how do we, how do we," he didn't say this exactly, but how do we cover this up, basically? How do we fix this? How do we keep this from going public? What do we need to do here? And that right there was a crime. And so it's more complicated than that. I'm just trying to stay out of the weeds once again. I had never really understood exactly what it was that led to the impeachment, because a lot of these books are very, there's a lot of drama in these books, and this book is not free from drama. Immediately after the first chapter, which is the immediate fall of Richard Nixon, why it happened, and Richard Nixon's last days, this book gets really into the weeds about who all these people were in the administration, who these people were under Haldeman and Chuck Colson, so like G. Gordon Liddy and what was the guy who wrote the books? Well, Chuck Colson wrote books also, but this other fellow, Hunt, E. Howard Hunt, he wrote like novels and things like that. He had worked for the CIA. He was kind of he was a wannabe James Bond, like a wannabe Ian Fleming type. How he came into the employ of H.R. Haldeman, I have no idea. And, or to his attention, rather. Watergate is kind of a confusing thing. There's a lot going on there, and this book was kind of confusing in that way. There was a lot of detail in this book, and sometimes it was too much detail for me. But Theodore Wyatt was trying to give a whole spread of this situation to tell the American people who was who and what they did and when, and the legality of all that. So it covers like the Pentagon Papers, Daniel Ellsberg, how they had broken into his psychiatrist's office and stole his file, and other things like that. Now, if I remember right, he didn't talk about, I'm just realizing this now, so the Attorney General at the time was named John Mitchell. His wife was named Martha Mitchell, and from what I remember, she was not in this book, but very little, and people have talked about how she knew what was going on, and they were keeping her in a hotel room and keeping her drunk so that she couldn't call reporters and tell them what was going on. That was not in this book, so yeah, I'm just glad to have read it, but it was hard to get through sometimes just because it was so dense, but I understood why it was dense. It was just too dense for me. The next book is Ray Bradbury's Zen in the Art of Writing. This was a reread for me. I really enjoyed this. I did and I didn't, because how do I explain this about Ray Bradbury? Bradbury was a very positive person. He was very spirited. He had he retained for his entire life a young boy's awe of the world, and so everything is interesting to Ray Bradbury. Everything is wonderful to Ray Bradbury. There is, in light and shadow and darkness and all that, it is a beautiful, wonderful world to Ray Bradbury, and he sees beauty in all things, and I find that sort of sickly sweet. I've said this, I don't know how better to explain it. I find Ray Bradbury to be sickly sweet. I think he was a great person. I think he was a great writer. I think that his stories are really good. Honestly, I think his stories are really good. I don't particularly care for the way Bradbury wrote. And I have read a lot of Bradbury's writing. I've read several of his novels and lots of his short stories. It doesn't mean that I don't respect Bradbury or I don't admire him. It just means that his stories are, I don't really click with them. I just don't click with Bradbury's writing, and it's no different in this book. So this is not really about how to write. This is more about how Ray Bradbury became a writer, about how some of his books took shape, about where some of his ideas came from, and his belief that everybody should write, and that you should write, I think, 1,000 words a day or 2,000 words a day every day for 10 years, and then after 10 years, maybe you will write something original. That's what happened to him, and he recounts how his first story, the first story he ever wrote, that he felt came from a deeper part of himself that was really original and authentic to himself. I believe it was called The Lake. I should have went back and read the story of The Lake. I have all of Bradbury's short stories, and I do read them, and I do enjoy them, but I have to take them. A little bit goes a long way. What I'm trying to say, a little bit goes a long way. It is so sweet, right? It's like eating too much birthday cake or something for me. Just a little goes a long way. And I did enjoy this, though. I was glad to reread this. It's not going to tell you how to be a better writer. He's really just talking about how he became a writer and giving you an idea of maybe how you can become a writer too. But there is a part in this that I would like to read to you because it really did touch me. It touched me the first time I read it, and it's very pretty, it's very interesting, and I will have to find it. So this is from a foreword he wrote to the 1974 edition of Dandelion Wine, which is a really, I suppose it's a novel. It kind of reads like a bunch of short stories stuck together, but really most of Bradbury's novels read that way. I thought it was sickly sweet. I read it. I liked it. It was overpowering. But this is from the foreword. A final memory. Fire balloons. You rarely see them these days, though in some countries I hear they are still made and filled with warm breath from a small straw fire hung beneath. But in 1925 Illinois, we still had them, and one of the last memories I have of my grandfather is the last hour of a 4th of July night 48 years ago, when Grandpa and I walked out on the lawn and lit a small fire and filled the pear-shaped red, white, and blue striped paper balloon with hot air, and held the flickering, bright angel presents in our hands a final moment in front of a porch lined with uncles and aunts and cousins and mothers and fathers, and then, very softly, let the thing that was light, that was life and light and mystery, go out of our fingers up on the summer air and away over the beginning to sleep houses among the stars, as fragile, as wondrous, as vulnerable, as lovely as life itself. I see my grandfather there looking up at that strange drifting light, thinking his own still thoughts. I see me, my eyes filled with tears, because it was all over. The night was done. I knew there would never be another night like this. No one said anything. We all just looked up at the sky, and we breathed out and in, and we all thought the same things, but nobody said. Somebody finally had to say, though, didn't they? And that one is me. The wine still waits in the cellars below. My beloved family still sits on the porch in the dark. The fire balloon still drifts and burns in the night sky of an as yet unburied summer. Why and how? Because I say it is so. And that's really what writing is about to Ray Bradbury. It's about capturing the beauty of life, the ideas of life, the people, the places, the scents, the smells, the sounds, the colors. And so, I've said this before, it's the truth. I wish I could fully appreciate Bradbury's writing. I wish I clicked with it so much, but I just don't. But I still love little gems like that. There are gems spread all throughout Bradbury's writing, and I wish that I clicked with. I wish that I clicked with his writing, and I just don't. But I like Bradbury. I really do. So the last book I just finished yesterday. I'm not sure when you will see this. This is the 9th, so I finished this on the 8th of May. It is somehow May already. I have lost track of time. It is No Parachute, a fighter pilot in World War I by Arthur Gould Lee. This was really, really good. So this is a book written by compiling letters and diary entries from Arthur Gould Lee's life. He was sent in 1917 to France to be a fighter pilot in a Sopwith Pup, the little plane right there. And these are very frank letters. He was sending these letters to his wife. If I had been his wife getting his letters, I think I would have told him to stop. Stop writing like that, because these are just so, I mean, he includes everything in there. Like, he would be flying and he'd see some German planes and they would shoot at him and there'd be bullet holes through his coat and they'd clip his gas tank and gas would start spraying out, and he's saying to his wife, nothing happened. I'm really glad that it didn't light on fire and burn me alive, because I see that happen to people like every other day and it's terrifying, and that's why we keep pistols in our cockpits. Not so we can fight Germans on the ground, but so we can shoot ourselves if we catch on fire. Uh, I don't think that I would have wanted to hear that, right? That's a bit much. And if you have ever been near one of these airplanes, they are just wood and fabric strapped to an engine and with a machine gun strapped on that. The idea that anybody would fly these and shoot at other people is just wild. I did learn that they had a really high ceiling. I didn't realize this, but they were going up to 20,000 feet, which is just crazy. That's, you can get pulmonary embolisms and things at that height. And I bet some of them did. I mean, you would get high altitude sickness, surely. Uh, I just really, really enjoyed this book. It gets a little bit repetitive, as you might imagine, because he's doing the same thing over and over again every day. Going up into the air, going on patrols every day, flying over the trenches, being shot at by the Germans in the trenches, being shot at by flak guns. They called it Archie. So they were taking Archie. And he was hit a couple of times by flak. And he talks about how they were trained at one point to drop bombs, how they were told towards the end of the war to strafe the enemy trenches, and that was the worst for him. Not flying up in the air, way up in the air, in these dogfights with German pilots, including, uh, you know, Richthofen's circus. So the Red Baron, basically, they were fighting the Red Baron, and it's just crazy to think about this, to think about these little planes, these little wood and cloth planes up in the sky. They can turn on a dime almost. If you've never seen it, it's almost unbelievable to see how agile these planes are. And they're moving relatively slow. I think the Sopwith Pup had a top speed of something like 112 miles an hour. And he said that if you get up really high, if you get up to 10,000 feet, 15,000 feet, it's like you're just sitting there, like you're not moving at all. Really interesting. And he loved flying. And he talks about the other, he was 22 years old. He talks about the other guys in his squadron, how he made friends with them, and they would go out on a perfectly fine morning, and two of them would not come back. And they would go out in the evening, and maybe one of them wouldn't come back, and then maybe they'd spend 2 weeks where nobody got killed, and then somebody would die in a crash taking off, or somebody would be, it's just, thinking about that is just crazy. And none of them knew if they were going to come back. Every time they set out, they didn't know if they were going to get off the ground. They didn't know if they would make it back, if maybe their plane would just stop working behind enemy lines and they would become a prisoner, or maybe they would come down between the trenches into no man's land and get shot, or if, if somebody would shoot their gas tank and they would catch on fire and burn up in the air. They didn't have any parachutes, which is why it's called no parachute. You had to ride your plane all the way down to the ground if the engine went out, or if you were shot, or so. The death rate among these kids, they were very young, it was very high, and just crazy. And he says, as an old man, he looks back from 1972 or so, and he thinks, could I have ever really done that? Was that me? Did I do that? Was I with those other boys? Were we really flying in those planes? Because he was only there for, I think, 6 months. And in those 6 months, everybody else in his squadron had either been killed or wounded and sent back, or had aged out and been sent home. And towards the end of his time in France, he was starting to uh, suffer basically from post-traumatic stress disorder, as we would think of it. He was having night sweats. He was having these terrible cases of indigestion. He couldn't eat. He was losing weight. He was having awful nightmares. He was having nightmares about what scared him the most was doing these trench raids where they would fly down over the trenches before these battles, where the trenches were full of German soldiers and they were all armed, and they would all see this little plane coming at 100 miles an hour and they would shoot at it. And so he started having nightmares where he was diving his plane into a pit with people shooting up at him all the way down. And so basically he was sent home because they knew that he had reached the end of his term as a pilot. And it was just, he questions what this war is for, but there is the element all throughout it of the stiff upper lip, the British stiff upper lip, and the understatement and all of that. He doesn't get too deep into his feelings or anything, but it's clear that this was a terrible time for him. It was an exhilarating time, but it was also a terrible strain on his nerves, having his friends killed all around him and that sort of thing, and killing people. Because when you're in the air, they're very close to each other. And he could see the people that he was killing. He could see them getting hit by the bullets. When he went over these trenches, he could see the men that he was killing in these trenches, the horses that he was killing in these trenches. And it must have just been terrible for him. But this is one of the best books on the subject I've ever read, for sure. So that is No Parachute by Arthur Gould Lee. I really enjoyed it. I recommend it if you're into this kind of thing. And yeah, that is my nonfiction reading update. Those are the books that I have read over the past month or so, 3 weeks, somewhere in there. No Surrender by Hiroo Onada, a memoir of his 30-year war. Breach of Faith, The Fall of Richard Nixon by Theodore H. White. I think I have these all out of order now. Zen in the Art of Writing by Ray Bradbury, and No Parachute by Arthur Gould Lee. So that brings us to the end of my nonfiction reading update. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm trying not to get down in the weeds in these videos. I hope I manage that. And I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.